The Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin records an observation made by RAV PAPAYUS with respect to Yitro's exclamation of Baruch Hashem asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Paro, that Gnai hu lemoshe v'shishim riboy. Shelo amru Baruch, that the fact that Moshe, along with and as leader of the Shishim Ribui, 600,000 males, did not proclaim Baruch ad sheba Yitro, prior to the arrival of Yitro, is deemed to be a Gnai. The term Gnai is a negative descriptive, and RAV PAPAYUS contrasts Yitro to Moshe and is critical of his lack of expressing Baruch. However, we are to understand this term Baruch until the arrival of Yitro, who upon hearing the miracles that had happened to the Bnei Israel exclaims Baruch Hashem. One must be careful how one translates words, because they do project an image that may not necessarily be the case. Almost all of the Parshat HaShavua writers to be found on the internet translate the word Gnai as it was a disgrace, a fairly harsh and damning statement with respect to Moshe Rabbeinu, and one that raises its own set of problems. While we all acknowledge that the term Gnai is a negative descriptive and can translate as disgrace and shame, my preference would be a less critical descriptive, one that suggests a shortcoming. It was a dishonor of sorts, in that, according to RAV PAPAYUS, despite all the miracles that he witnessed, he did not, on the literal level, say Baruch, and with this lack of Baruch, Moshe Rabbeinu did not express an adequate appreciation of God's actions on behalf of Bnei Israel. This would be a short, straightforward reading of the criticism of Moshe Rabbeinu. The obvious problem with the statement of RAV PAPAYUS is the reality of Shmot 15. We have almost a half perek of Shira that Moshe, along with the Bnei Israel, men and women, offered following the Kriyat Yam Suf, which at face value invalidates the assertion of RAV PAPAYUS. In defense of RAV PAPAYUS, one might wish to suggest a distinction between the Az Yashir Moshe of Bnei Israel of Shmot 15 and the Baruch Hashem of Yitro, in that Shmot 15 focused upon the greatness of God. It was a form of praise, but lacked another component, that of Baruch. Baruch is an acknowledgement of God's control over and involvement in the activities of man, God's hashgacha, and while Moshe Rabbeinu offered praise, he lacked the acknowledgement of God's control over mankind. This appears to be the approach of most of the internet rabbis, who base the distinction upon a Mishnah in Brachot that one must bless God both for the good and the bad that happens to one during one's lifetime. A distinction is made between blessing and giving thanks. The Shira of Moshe Rabbeinu was giving thanks, whereas Yitro, with his Baruch Hashem, was acknowledging God's control over the physical world. The Rebbe in footnote number 3 rejects this distinction. In the words of the footnote, V'im hakavana al halashon Baruch dafka, that if the shortcoming and the critique of Moshe Rabbeinu lay in the fact that there was a lacking in the format, namely, it was praise rather than the more sophisticated acknowledgement of God's control over mankind. To this the Rebbe argues that, for all intents and purposes, we are dealing here with an expression of gratitude for events that had taken place, and one would be hard-pressed to make the case that there is a distinction on that level between the Shira of Moshe and the Baruch Hashem of Yitro. There is also the issue that when one extrapolates the position of the internet rabbis, there is the suggestion that Moshe's understanding of God was still under development, in that he lacked an acceptance of God's hashgacha, as expressed by the fact that he did not offer Baruch, a conclusion that is somewhat problematic to say the least. Which brings us back to the original question, that in light of the fact that we have not just two words, Baruch Hashem, but half a perek, in which Moshe, along with the nation, expressed gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Az Yashir Moshe, what then was the critique of Moshe Rabbeinu expressed by Rabbi PAPAYUS in that Shelo Amru Baruch?